Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a rugged North Georgia farmer receives a smug letter demanding public access to his private trout pond, he doesn't just push back, he declares war. Armed with cameras, old deeds, and iron resolve, Sam Hudson faces off against a corrupt HOA in a battle for land, legacy, and justice. I've lived on this land my entire adult life, and I don't rattle easy. I've survived flash floods, machinery fires, a bear breaking into my smokehouse, and the loss of my wife to cancer. But the thing that finally got my blood pressure flirting with stroke levels? A cream-colored envelope with an embossed logo reading High Ridge Waters HOA, and my name typed out like I was some damn tenant in a Florida timeshare. It was mid-morning when I found it wedged into the gate. Not mailed, not posted, physically stuffed into the wrought iron fence that surrounds my driveway. I cracked it open with the same wariness you reserve for suspicious meat in your fridge. Inside was a letter, 3 pages long, printed in 14-point Times New Roman with all the smug authority of a lawyer who doesn't realize you used to be one of the people who trained EPA compliance agents. According to the document, I was now obligated to open up access to my pond for the enjoyment and safety of the High Ridge Waters community. The letter listed a full inventory of expectations, remove the warning signs, and private property. Boards, provide a gravel walking path to the water, install 3 public benches and a floating dock, and, my favorite, cease use of chemicals or fertilizers that may affect the shared ecosystem. The letter concluded by warning me of possible civil penalties and county intervention if I didn't comply. I reread it 3 times. Each time it made less sense. Let's get one thing straight. I don't live in a suburban subdivision. My name's Sam Hudson. I'm 45 years old. I run a small trout hatchery and farm in the North Georgia mountains, 80 acres passed down from my father and his before him. The pond they're salivating over is spring-fed, clean as glass, stocked with rainbow trout, and entirely within my property line, not adjacent, not partially shared, not touching their lots by so much as a blade of grass. High Ridge Waters is a gated community built less than a decade ago on the ridge just south of my fence line. Rows of identical oversized houses with aluminum shingles and Tesla chargers in every driveway. My dad used to take me hiking up there before it was bulldozed into what I now refer to as Stepford but with golf carts. I'd never had any problems with them until apparently they decided they were entitled to my water. I poured myself a cup of strong black coffee, sat down on my porch, and reread the letter a 4th time. By then, it had started to amuse me. Civil penalties, community rights. I could practically hear my father's ghost laughing and muttering, "Let them try." An hour later, I went into my office and printed off a formal letter of refusal. I stapled copies of my property deed, a topographic map with boundary overlays, and the water rights paperwork I had renewed 2 years ago, legally binding and state certified. I mailed 1 packet to the HOA's return address and hand-delivered another to their security office. The guy behind the desk, a kid barely old enough to rent a car, tried to act like I was violating protocol by approaching the booth. I smiled and placed the envelope on the counter like I was dropping off a bomb. Then I came home and got to work. I installed 3 new private property, no trespassing signs around the pond's perimeter. I repainted the old authorized access only placard and bolted it directly onto the aluminum gate near the tractor path. Then I checked the solar-powered security cameras I'd installed last winter. They all had clean angles on the water, the gate, and the access road. I added motion alerts to my phone and tablet, then logged into the system to archive footage. Not paranoia, just good habits. Especially when you know trouble is coming from people who have never sweated through a real job. I figured that would be the end of it, or at least put a cork in the bottle for a while. But 2 days later, I got a voicemail from someone named Karen Worthington, who introduced herself as president of High Ridge Waters HOA. The message was sugary on the surface and condescending underneath, like a poisoned muffin. "Hi, Mr. Hudson, I just wanted to confirm you received our community request. It's very important for neighborhood safety that we maintain water access and prevent individual control of natural resources. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding, and we'd love to speak with you about next steps before legal involvement becomes necessary." I didn't call her back. I forwarded the voicemail to my lawyer friend in Athens instead, just to have it on record. Then I checked my security feed again. That same afternoon, someone on a golf cart had pulled up to my southern fence line. A woman with a blonde bob and a clipboard peered through the mesh like she was casing the place for renovation. She didn't come onto the property, but she spent a good 10 minutes pointing at the pond, jotting notes, and taking photos on her phone. Then she left. By evening, I had calls from 3 different locals, friends from the post office, hardware store, and bait shop, asking why the hell my name was being tossed around as the guy trying to block community swimming access. Apparently, the HOA had already started whisper campaigns that I was hoarding the pond, polluting it with toxic algae feed, and refusing to allow children to fish. I've dealt with bears. I've dealt with contractors who tried to cut corners on cement. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a move, and I knew damn well what came next. 3 mornings later, just as I was dragging a net full of trout from the holding pen near the dock, I saw a white Cadillac SUV crawling up my driveway like it had something to prove. I watched it through the steam rising off the water, the sun barely peeking over the ridge. The vehicle came to a stop just short of my gate, blocking my truck's access path. 4 people climbed out, 3 in identical navy blue polo shirts with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest, and 1 woman in a crisp beige pantsuit, looking like she'd just walked out of a home renovation commercial, Karen Worthington. I recognized her immediately, not just from the security footage, but from the smug set of her jaw. She had that professional volunteer energy you only find in people who run PTA boards like prison camps. "Mr. Hudson," she called out, stepping briskly toward the gate with a folder in hand. We thought it was time we had a friendly face-to-face. I set down the trout net and walked up the incline, slowly wiping my hands on a towel. My dog Boone trotted at my side, tail low, ears forward. "I think I already made my position clear," I said evenly. "This is private property. You and your people are not invited." Karen smiled with all the warmth of an IRS audit. "We're not here to argue, Sam. We're just here to assess the area before our scheduled improvements. It's very important that we begin preparing for community access. Liability issues, insurance coordination, infrastructure behind her." One of the polo-shirted men was pulling a tape measure from his belt and stepping toward my eastern fence line. Another had a clipboard and was making notes about tree placement. "You can stop that right now," I said. "No one crosses that gate without a warrant." Karen gave me a patronizing look, the kind usually reserved for kindergartners or drunk relatives. "You don't need to make this difficult. We assumed you'd come around eventually." "That's where you assumed wrong." I walked to the gate, unlatched it, and stepped out with Boone beside me. The moment my boots touched gravel on the other side, one of the men, the younger one, maybe early 30s, stepped forward. "You can't block access to a natural water feature," he said. "There are state ordinances." "No," I snapped, "there aren't. And I suggest you brush up on the law before you quote it in front of a former federal inspector." That froze him for a beat. Karen's smile didn't flicker. "Look," she said, "I understand your attachment to this property. It's rustic, charming, very historical. But the truth is, you're the only holdout in a region that's evolving. The community expects certain standards. The pond is a resource for all of us now." "No," I said simply. "It isn't." Karen's eyes hardened. "Then I'm afraid this is going to escalate, Sam. You've made this personal. That's unfortunate." She motioned to her people, who reluctantly stopped their measuring and retreated to the SUV. Before getting in, Karen looked over her shoulder. "You'll be hearing from our legal counsel. Oh, and I'd strongly advise you to reconsider your use of electric fencing near public pathways. That's a serious safety risk." The SUV peeled off in a small cloud of dust, and I stood there for a long while, watching it vanish up the road. I already had my phone in hand before I turned back toward the house. I wasn't just dealing with entitlement anymore. This wasn't a misunderstanding or even a bluff. It was a campaign, and they were just getting started. It didn't take long for them to make their next move. 2 days after Karen's little inspection tour, I was inside the barn tuning up the generator that powers the water aerators when Boone let out a low growl near the front door. That dog doesn't growl for no reason. I stood up slowly, wiped my hands, and followed him out. What I saw made me think I'd accidentally wandered into a neighborhood block party, except it was on my damn land. 2 men in safety vests were hammering a temporary construction sign into the dirt near the fork in my driveway. It read, "Community Pond, Construction Access. Please use caution." Behind them was a landscaping truck I'd never seen before, backed up close to my fence line with a trailer full of gravel buckets and wooden stakes. And standing just beyond my gate, with her arms folded and sunglasses perched high like a general surveying the battlefield, was Karen Worthington. I didn't yell. I didn't run. I simply walked up, unlocked the gate, and stepped out onto the gravel. "Move that truck," I said. Karen turned, feigning surprise. "Sam, good morning. Just a little prep work for the trail path. Don't worry, no heavy equipment yet." "You're trespassing," I said. "And so are your hired hands." One of the guys with the vests looked up and mumbled, "We're just following the work order, sir." "I didn't sign any damn work order." Karen took a slow breath, like I was being unreasonable for not giving her permission to break the law. "We received provisional approval from the county to begin preparations for a public access path. The easement request is still pending, but there's no reason we can't begin low-impact prep. There is when it's not your land. You'll want to be very careful with how you handle this," she said. "We've spoken with the sheriff's department, and you're on notice for escalating behavior. Any threat or aggression, verbal or physical, will be documented." That's when I saw it. One of the men was holding his phone up, recording. "Get office my property," I said, my voice low and flat. "We are adjacent," Karen said, her tone sugary again. "The corner you're referring to is disputed based on incomplete historic mapping." "No, it isn't. I've got boundary pins sunk 2 feet deep and a 1982 county survey to prove it." Karen signaled the man with the phone. He stepped forward, speaking louder than necessary. "Ma'am, he's becoming aggressive," he said toward the camera. "He's interfering with public right-of-way improvements. Should I call it in?" And just like that, Karen dialed. I didn't panic. I didn't move. I walked slowly to the gate, pulled out my phone, and tapped the security system app. With a few swipes, I queued up a live feed from the northeast camera, crystal clear footage showing Karen's crew entering without permission, placing signage, and blocking my drive. By the time the county sheriff's deputies arrived, 2 cruisers, lights off but visible, I had my footage exported onto a flash drive and was standing at the fence, calm as still water. Karen rushed toward them with exaggerated urgency, claiming I'd made threatening statements and was aggressively preventing access to a community water feature. The lead deputy turned to me. "Sir, do you have weapons on you?" "Not on me," I said. "Rifles locked in the barn. I haven't pointed anything at anyone." "Anyone injured?" "No." Karen cut in. "He has a dog trained to intimidate, and he charged one of my contractors." I looked down at Boone. He was lying in the dirt, chewing a stick. The deputy took a deep breath and said, "Mr. Hudson, do you have any video of the incident?" "I do." 10 minutes later, the deputies were watching security footage from 3 different angles. No weapons, no threats, no aggression. Just a property owner telling strangers to leave his land. The lead deputy handed the flash drive back. "Looks clean. Ms. Worthington, this is clearly private property. You don't have authority to post signs here." Karen's lips twitched. "But this area is under planning review. There's ambiguity." "There's no ambiguity on that video." Karen tried to argue, but it fell flat. The deputies told her and her contractors to remove the signs and vacate the area. She didn't take it well. Her face turned red, but she backed off, shooting daggers in my direction as she climbed into her Cadillac. They left. But the next morning, a Facebook post circulated in 3 community groups, accusing me of threatening children's access to the pond, endangering workers, and hoarding a shared natural resource. And just like that, it wasn't just Karen anymore. I drove down to the county land office that Monday with a fresh thermos of coffee and a manila folder thick enough to give a chiropractor pause. Inside, every deed, plat map, survey, and notarized record my father had ever collected about the property. I even brought the old topo overlay he kept in a frame, marked with pencil notes from the 70s. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to get ahead of one. The land office clerk, an older guy named Jim I'd spoken with a few times over the years, greeted me with a cautious smile. "Something tells me this ain't a trout licensing issue." "Nope," I said. "It's a land theft issue dressed up like community planning." He nodded slowly, motioned for me to follow him into the back. I explained what was going on. He raised his eyebrows a few times, but said little until I showed him a copy of the HOA's letter. Then he said, "That's weird. Wait here a sec." 10 minutes later, he returned with a young woman in a blazer and name tag that read LISA, Land use coordinator. She was polite, but I could feel the PR armor in her tone. Mr. Hudson, she said, we did recently receive a preliminary site proposal from High Ridge Waters HOA. It includes long-term improvements to community green space, but I wasn't aware your property was part of it. It isn't. She glanced down at the documents, then flipped open a digital tablet. After a few taps, she turned the screen to me. There it was. An updated map. On it, my pond was shaded light green. A dotted line labeled Pedestrian Nature Trail Phase 2 curved right through the southern quarter of my land. I stared at it. Where did you get this map? It was submitted by the HOA's design consultant. And what's this easement listed here? I pointed at a dashed rectangle marked Temporary Public Access, established 1996, pending confirmation. Lisa tapped the screen. That notation was part of a supporting document, a provisional servitude apparently granted by the prior landowner. Your father? No, ma'am, I said. My father didn't give anyone access to this land, and I've got his signed refusal, notarized in 2006, rejecting all easement requests from surrounding developments. I pulled out the paper and handed it to her. Lisa read it, then reread it, then went very quiet. This changes things. I'd say it damn well does. She said they'd review the file and temporarily freeze any processing of the HOA's development requests. I didn't leave it at that. I submitted an official complaint for land boundary manipulation and public misrepresentation. Jim co-signed it and gave me a case number. When I got back home, Boone was barking at a drone hovering just above the pasture. I watched it for a second, then pulled out my phone and zoomed in. The logo on the side read, HRW Ecological Planning Committee. They weren't stopping. They were just changing tactics. That evening, while sorting through old documents, I found something I hadn't seen in years. A letter my father wrote to a developer back in 2004, declining an offer to contribute a community access parcel. At the bottom was a handwritten note, let them pave their own damn pond. This one's ours. The next morning, I called a contact I hadn't spoken to in a while. Her name was Allie DeWitt, an environmental land rights attorney in Atlanta. Used to work federal. The kind who doesn't blink when someone brings her a map with forged borders. High Ridge, she said after I explained everything. They're pushing the servitude argument, huh? Hard. Then we get louder. Let me make a few calls. Also, don't be surprised if they try something cute. Define cute. You'll know it when it happens. It happened just after midnight. I was in bed reading an old fly fishing journal when Boone started pacing at the window, ears pinned, tail low. He didn't bark this time, just that tight, quiet growl he saves for coyotes or strangers. I slipped out of bed, grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand, and went to the back door. Before I even opened it, I saw it. A faint, bouncing glow moving along the tree line near the pump station. That station feeds water from the springhead into the trout pens. Without it, the pond starts stagnating in hours. Every pipe, switch, and sensor in that system is what keeps this entire operation breathing. I didn't yell. I didn't even slam the door. I moved fast and quiet, flashlight off, Boone at my side. As I rounded the barn and crept up the gravel path, I saw them. Two silhouettes by the pump house, crouched low, fumbling with something near the power box. I clicked on the flashlight and called out, "You're on private property. Step back from that unit, now." One of them jerked upright. The other dropped what looked like a pry bar and bolted toward the trees. The one who stayed didn't run. He straightened, raised his hands halfway, and said, "Whoa, hey, we're just here to check the lines. There was a service ticket open." "Bullshit," I said. "Who sent you?" "High Ridge HOA, maintenance subcontract." I snapped a picture of him on the spot. Face, hands, vest, clipboard. Then I told him to lie flat on the gravel until deputies arrived. He hesitated, like he might try something stupid. Boone stepped forward, growled once, and the guy hit the ground like a sack of seed. By the time the sheriff's deputy showed up, I had the guy's ID, the license plate off his van, and a Ziploc bag with the pry bar and a bolt he'd dropped. The deputy didn't even argue. He saw the security camera mounted above the pump house and asked if the footage was rolling. "You bet your ass it was." The deputy took the guy into custody for trespassing and attempted tampering with private utilities. The other runner got away, but they found his tire tracks leading back toward the HOA gate. I knew what was coming next, so I called Allie at 6 in the morning. "They came for the pump," I said. "Told you they'd get cute," she replied. Document everything. And we're filing today. By 9, I'd sent over the footage, photos, and witness report. By 10, Allie had drafted an initial civil action against the HOA for criminal trespass, attempted sabotage, and intentional interference with private utility infrastructure. Around noon, I received an email from Karen Worthington herself. It was dressed up like a concern for public safety, claiming her office had received reports of unsafe wiring near a shared environmental resource and that her team was only attempting to ensure community safety. I forwarded the email straight to Allie. Her response was short. "They're bluffing. Time to go public." Later that afternoon, I posted a series of screenshots from the security footage to my business's website and social media. No commentary, no rage. Just the facts. 2 men at night, tools in hand, caught on a system guarding legally registered agricultural infrastructure. The internet took care of the rest. By the next day, I was getting phone calls from neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years, offering help. One of them, Tom Reynolds, who lived just outside the HOA perimeter, brought over a roll of fresh fencing and a new motion-activated floodlight. "Just say the word, and we'll string this whole side with reinforced mesh," he said. "We're not letting them screw with your land." That night, I installed a third camera angle pointed directly at the access road. I also added a sign near the pond gate. It read, "Private water. Trespassers will be documented and prosecuted. Fish bite harder than lawyers." The envelope arrived 2 days later, certified and smug. The return address wasn't Karen's, but the law firm she'd no doubt retained for her latest stunt, Caldwell and Dean, LLP, out of Macon. Inside was a thick packet labeled Civil Action, High Ridge Waters HOA versus Samuel Hudson, and in bold, right there on the summary page, cause, obstruction of community access / environmental harm / non-compliant structures. I sat down, poured a finger of bourbon, mid-morning or not, and read every page. They were suing me, claiming I had erected non-permitted fencing that blocked established community recreational easements, claiming the pond was part of a shared environmental basin due to historical runoff patterns, claiming my trout pens introduced chemical contaminants into a delicate shared watershed, and that my refusal to remove barriers was endangering the health and safety of the residents of High Ridge Waters. They even included a demand that I allow full pedestrian access to the water line, remove all obstructive fencing and signage, and pay damages of $72,000 for ecological mitigation. I laughed out loud at that part. $72 grand for fish poop and fences. By the time I finished reading, I was mad enough to chew gravel. I called Allie and read her the claims. "They're going full scorched earth," she said. "Good. We'll return the favor." Within 48 hours, we'd filed a counterclaim. Our response included trespassing charges backed by camera footage and witness statements, allegations of attempted sabotage of protected utility systems, claims of slander and reputational harm referencing Karen's public smear campaign, and the big one, fraudulent land filings tied directly to the doctored map Karen had submitted, complete with forged servitude claims and a falsified overlay. Allie dug deeper and found something better. One of the survey amendments included a digital signature from a county zoning officer, supposedly dated 3 years prior, but the guy had only been hired last year. Forgery. We submitted that too, along with a request to freeze any county review of HOA proposals pending criminal investigation. Then came the escalation. Karen began a coordinated PR blitz, email chains, flyers in mailboxes, community Facebook posts, calling me an aggressor, a hostile land monopolist, and my personal favorite, an enemy of shared prosperity. She even had a group of kids from the HOA film a video pretending they'd grown up by the pond, complete with dramatic music and drone footage that, if you looked closely, had clearly been taken after they trespassed. But I wasn't losing ground. Not an inch. One afternoon, a local news van pulled up near the front gate. I stepped out calm as ever and gave them the short version, showed them the footage, showed them the pond boundary, showed them the trout pens, the gate, the deeds, and the line in the ground that said, "Mine, not yours." The segment aired that night. Karen declined to appear on camera. A week later, we received notice. The judge had granted preliminary hearings on both suits, with priority placed on determining the validity of the land filings. That was the crack in the wall. If we could prove the filings were falsified, and we could, then everything else collapsed. The easement claims, the environmental hysteria, the access requests, all of it. I got a message from Jim at the county land office the next morning. "You'll want to see this. One of Karen's friends is under internal review." I smiled. Boone wagged his tail like he knew something big had shifted. The county zoning officer's name was Brent Mallory. Clean suit, thin tie, face like wet dough. I'd seen him once at a farmer's market handing out brochures about smart land use. Now he was on paid leave, pending a criminal investigation for signing off on a document before he even worked there. When I got to the courthouse for the preliminary hearing, he was already inside, seated behind his attorney. His neck was blotchy. Karen wasn't in the room, but her lawyer was. Same guy who signed that $70,000 insult of a claim. Allie stood beside me, calm and sharp in a gray jacket, her briefcase neatly stacked with exhibits. The judge, an older woman with reading glasses perched halfway down her nose, called the room to order and went straight to the issue of the map. "This proceeding will determine whether the submitted land use filings from High Ridge Waters HOA contain material falsehoods or misrepresentations." Brent shifted in his seat like someone had just tightened his belt a notch too far. Then Allie pulled up the digital records. She showed the judge the timestamp on the file, dated nearly 18 months before Brent had joined the zoning office. Then she played a screen recording of the county's own hiring records. Brent started 6 months after the signature was supposedly filed. It wasn't just a clerical error, it was a lie. Karen's lawyer objected, muttered something about preliminary drafts, but the judge cut him off. "Is there a signed affidavit from Mr. Hudson granting easement access?" "No, Your Honor." "Is there any record, verbal, written, transactional, of consent from the prior landowner?" "No, Your Honor." "Then this court finds preliminary cause to investigate criminal forgery and zoning." Fraud boom. Brent's face drained like someone pulled the plug. By the time the hearing adjourned, 2 county officers escorted him out a side door. He didn't look at me once. He didn't need to. Karen, of course, went quiet for a full day. Then her machine started spinning again, this time with a different strategy. Someone spray-painted "selfish landlord" on my mailbox that night. A day later, one of my trout delivery clients backed out of a contract, citing concerns over negative press. Boone stepped on a roofing nail someone had tossed in the grass outside the gate. I pulled it out myself. He didn't even whimper. Allie called with a warning. "Expect noise. She's not out of ammo yet." I doubled the security feed, added backup power to the cameras, and bought a new drone of my own. Set it to auto-patrol the edge of my boundary line. Every time it spotted a figure within 15 feet of my fence, it pinged my phone and snapped a photo. That week, I got pings every damn day. Karen was using residents now, rotating HOA volunteers who would walk their neighborhood borders and just happened to pause near the pond. One guy even brought a lawn chair and sat at the corner post with binoculars like it was a nature reserve. I called the sheriff. Again. This time, he issued formal warnings for 2 individuals, both HOA members, both caught on camera crossing the boundary and photographing my pump system. "We've had enough calls from you to write a damn novel," the deputy said with a half smile. "But it's helping. You're playing it clean. Don't stop now." That night, as I was locking up the storage shed, I looked out at the pond, moonlight glinting off the still surface. My dad built this place with his bare hands. He stocked it, dredged it, defended it. I wasn't about to let some real estate queen with a clipboard and a grudge walk in and rename it a picnic ground. No chance in hell. The court date landed like a thunderclap. Monday morning, 9 sharp, full hearing. The courthouse was busier than I'd ever seen it. Local reporters, HOA members in clean polos. Even a few of my neighbors who'd never said more than howdy came to sit in the back row, arms folded, waiting to see what would drop. Karen showed up looking like she was about to receive an award. Navy skirt suit, white pearls, smug tilt to her chin like she owned the oxygen in the room. Her lawyer sat stiff beside her, flipping through a binder like he still had hope. Allie stood like a stone, calm, deadly. She opened with the map. "Your Honor, we submit that the HOA knowingly filed falsified zoning maps that misrepresented land boundaries, easement rights, and water access in direct violation of state and federal land protection laws." Then she moved to the servitude claim. She brought out the notarized letter from my father, the survey overlays, the chain of title record. She even subpoenaed a former notary who'd signed the original affidavit rejecting easement requests. Karen's team tried to interrupt, claimed historical community use, claimed verbal consent, claimed shared resource doctrine. But Allie was already ready. The pond is spring-fed, fully enclosed by Mr. I. Hudson's deeded property, and serves as both his utility source and commercial fishery. There is no precedent for community access. There is no implied consent. There is only falsified paperwork and criminal misrepresentation. Then she pulled the trigger. We also submit sworn testimony from Brent Mallory, who admitted under oath that he falsified the digital timestamp on the zoning overlay at the direct instruction of HOA President Karen Worthington in exchange for promises of land development. Partnerships. Karen froze. Her lawyer leaned back, slow, like someone watching a tower collapse in slow motion. The judge didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. This court finds that High Ridgewater's HOA engaged in deliberate zoning fraud, forged government documents, and coordinated illegal access attempts on private land. The easement claims are invalid. The environmental claims are unsupported. The defendant, Mr. Hudson, is exonerated of all allegations. And then came the hammer. In addition, this court refers Ms. Worthington and associated HOA officers for criminal prosecution under state law for conspiracy, falsification of public records, and attempted illegal seizure of private property. The gasps in the courtroom were louder than the judge's gavel. Karen tried to stand. She started shouting something about doing it for the children, but the bailiff was already moving. Her voice broke when she realized they were cuffing her right there in court. No back door, no gentle delay. 2 deputies escorted her out, shoes clicking on tile. I didn't smile. I didn't even move. Allie whispered, "We're filing for damages tomorrow. It'll be a big number." The judge closed with one final order: the dissolution of High Ridgewater's HOA, pending liquidation of all assets to settle damages and legal costs. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like bees. I gave one short statement: land is land. Lies don't change boundaries. You build something honest. You protect it. Then I drove home with Boone riding shotgun, his head out of the window, catching the wind like it had finally turned in our favor. That night, I sat by the pond with a cigar and watched the moon ripple across water that was once again unquestioned, unclaimed, and mine. They started tearing down the HOA signposts that same week. First came the emails, formal notifications to all residents of High Ridgewaters that the HOA board had been dissolved by court order, dues suspended, access cards deactivated, the amenities committee disbanded. No more Karen, no more community enrichment nights, no more ridiculous lawn color compliance forms. Then came the audits. Turns out Karen hadn't just tried to steal my pond. She'd been quietly bleeding the community for years. Inflated landscaping contracts, ghost invoices, a private retreat in Asheville billed as a watershed development conference, HOA money used to pay off personal legal fees, even a leased Lexus SUV tucked neatly under communications vehicle. People were furious. A group of residents launched a class action suit against her and the former board members. One of them, a middle-aged guy named Cliff, who always used to avoid eye contact at the co-op, showed up at my gate with a box of cookies and a handshake. "You weren't the villain, Sam. We just didn't see what she was doing." Another brought over a binder of old emails, evidence that Karen had been targeting me for over 2 years, trying to map out weak spots in my property line, even coordinating with realtors to push narratives that the pond was likely to become public. Allie filed our damages claim 2 days after the ruling. The court didn't flinch. The judgment came back at $1.7 million for defamation, attempted land seizure, business disruption, and legal costs. Liquidation of HOA reserves covered just under half. The rest was to be paid personally by Karen and her 2 officers, who'd stood with her during the trespassing stunt by the pump house. Karen's home, technically built on a questionable lot barely cleared under the rezoning overlay, was seized for partial repayment. That little communications Lexus, sold at auction to cover Boone's vet bills and a new drone. It was poetic. I used part of the funds to rebuild the gate and install an armored keypad system with a steel entrance arch. Not flashy, just firm. The kind of gate that says politely, but unmistakably, "Not yours." I also upgraded the pond's perimeter fencing and brought in an engineer to reroute one section of the overflow, tightening flow control and adding solar-powered sensors to prevent tampering. But not all the changes were defensive. I reopened the trout reservation books. By spring, we were back to full capacity. People drove in from 3 counties to fish that water, some just to say they'd seen the pond that beat the HOA. I hired 2 part-timers, kids from the nearby high school agriculture program, to help me manage the pens. Taught them how to net without spooking the fish, how to balance the algae levels, and how to read a well-fed trout's mood from 20 feet. Even Boone seemed lighter. He'd sit out by the gravel road in the sun, like a retired sheriff who'd cleaned up one last mess before finally settling down. The day the last community park sign came down, I stood at the edge of the pond with a cup of black coffee and let myself breathe deep. The air didn't smell like victory. It smelled like cedar, fish feed, spring runoff, and clean earth. It smelled like mine. A month after the last payment cleared, I got a letter from the State Water Advisory Board. It wasn't a bill for once. It was an invitation. Apparently, word of the case had spread, first through local papers, then through a few legal blogs, then into niche forums about property rights and HOA overreach. A quiet little farm in North Georgia had become a landmark case in private land protection. They wanted me to speak at a conference in Atlanta, not as a lawyer, not as an expert, just as someone who didn't back down. I almost threw it away, but the idea stuck in my head like a splinter. 3 weeks later, I stood in front of a podium in a too-clean hotel ballroom, staring out at a few hundred city officials, landowners, and young lawyers in blazers too sharp for their shoulders. I wasn't comfortable. I wasn't polished, but I told them the truth. I told them about my dad and the rocks he hauled to build the dam line by hand. I told them about the trout, the pump house, the solar rig. I told them about the way Karen's HOA crept closer each year, how their tone changed from polite to entitled to hostile. I told them how you can be right and still get run over if you don't put up a damn fence and lock it. They clapped. Some asked questions. A young woman from Colorado asked if I'd testify for a similar case they were fighting over a stream access trail. I said sure. Why not? By fall, I'd given 2 more talks, published an op-ed in the Savannah Ledger, and agreed to consult on a documentary series about rural land defense. The producer had a real fancy way of phrasing things, called it a clash between legacy and suburban imperialism. I just called it what it was. You don't get to take what isn't yours. That winter, I turned the old storage barn into a small office. Nothing big, just a desk, Wi-Fi, and a filing cabinet. Put up a little wooden sign over the door that read, Hudson Land Stewardship and Rural Advocacy. A few farmers from over in Jasper came by for advice. A retired couple from Tennessee sent me their deed and asked me if their lake could be taken. I told them, not if you keep your records tight, your gates locked, and your neighbors at arm's length when they start smiling too wide. Sometimes people send letters now, or trout jerky, or dog treats for Boone. One guy sent a bottle of moonshine with a tag that read, for standing your ground when the lawyers got loud. But I didn't do any of this to be noble. I did it because some people think fences are optional, because some people think ponds don't count if they're not full of jet skis, because some people think the word community is a crowbar, not a handshake. Now they know different. Last week, a young family from the county stopped by to fish. First-timers, brought their own poles, packed a lunch. The little girl caught her first trout, squealed so loud Boone jumped straight into the water, trying to see what the fuss was about. As they packed up to leave, the dad turned back and said, "You ever think about putting up a sign that says private pond, but friendly owner?" I smiled and said, I just might, but I never did, because the pond doesn't need a sign anymore. It has a story.